When my daughter asked about the man with my wife, I knew the truth was finally out. The question came from the back seat of the car. Soft, innocent, almost casual. Dad, who was the man with Mom earlier? Daniel Harper's hands tightened around the steering wheel. Outside the windshield, Seattle's evening traffic blurred into streaks of red lights and rain-slick asphalt. The city looked the same as it always had, busy, restless, indifferent. But something inside him shifted. He glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. Lily was hugging her stuffed rabbit, staring out the window as if she had simply asked about the weather. Daniel forced a smile. What man, sweetheart? The one who came out of Mom's room this afternoon. The world didn't explode. There was no dramatic sound, just the quiet invisible cracking of a life he thought he understood. And in that moment, Daniel Harper knew something terrible had already begun. The Harper house stood on a quiet street in Bellevue, just across Lake Washington from Seattle. From the outside, it looked like something from a real estate magazine. Clean lines of modern architecture, large glass windows, and a manicured lawn that Emily insisted on maintaining perfectly. Neighbors often described the Harpers as the ideal family. Daniel worked long hours at North Arc Design, one of the city's fastest-growing architecture firms. His projects were beginning to attract national attention. Emily, meanwhile, had built a small but successful presence online. Her Instagram page showcased a life of minimalist beauty, morning lattes, yoga poses by the lake, perfectly plated dinners. Thousands of followers admired her life. But what the photos never showed were the quiet spaces between them, the silences, the loneliness, the things that grow in marriages when people stop talking. Daniel pulled into the driveway that evening, still thinking about Lily's question. Inside the house, Emily stood in the kitchen, slicing avocados with calm precision. She looked up and smiled. You're home early. Her voice was warm, natural, too natural. Daniel studied her face the way an architect studies a structure, looking for stress fractures beneath the surface. Yeah, he said slowly. Meetings got cancelled. Emily wiped her hands on a towel and walked over to kiss his cheek. I was just making dinner. Her perfume smelled faintly of jasmine. Daniel wondered why he had never noticed how carefully she chose it. From the living room, Lily's cartoon played softly. For a moment, everything felt normal again. Maybe he had imagined the tension. Maybe Lily had misunderstood. Children did that sometimes. Your trip go well? Emily asked. Fine. Daniel loosened his tie. Then he asked the question as casually as he could. Did anyone stop by today? Emily paused, just for half a second, but Daniel saw it. Architects are trained to notice small details. No, she said. The knife resumed its steady rhythm against the cutting board. Why? Daniel leaned against the counter. Lily mentioned someone. Emily laughed lightly. Oh, that. Daniel's heartbeat slowed. Yeah? It was Marcus. We had a quick meeting about the branding campaign. Marcus. The name landed quietly between them. Daniel had heard it before. Marcus Blake was a tech entrepreneur who had recently approached Emily about promoting a wellness app. Daniel nodded. Right. Emily looked relieved. Honestly, it was boring business stuff. You didn't miss anything. She returned to slicing vegetables. Conversation over. But Daniel stood there longer than necessary, watching her, wondering how many lies could hide inside a perfectly normal evening. Later that night, after Lily fell asleep, Daniel opened Emily's Instagram page. The latest photo had been posted only an hour earlier. Emily standing on their balcony at sunset. The caption read, "Grateful for quiet evenings at home." Daniel stared at the screen, because he now understood something unsettling. The most convincing lies weren't dramatic. They were ordinary, quiet, carefully framed. And somewhere inside that beautiful picture-perfect life, the truth had already begun to rot. For the next few days, Daniel tried to forget the question. He told himself that Lily had simply misunderstood what she saw. Children were curious, imaginative. They asked questions about everything. A man leaving Emily's home office could mean anything. A business meeting, a delivery, a friend. But doubt, once planted, has a way of growing in quiet corners of the mind. And Daniel Harper had always been a man who noticed details. It was part of his job. Architects were trained to read structures the way doctors read X-rays. Tiny fractures in a wall could reveal deeper problems inside the foundation. Now Daniel found himself looking at his own life the same way. At first the inconsistencies were small. So small they could almost be ignored. One evening, while Daniel was reviewing blueprints at the dining table, Emily's phone vibrated softly on the kitchen counter. She glanced at it, then quickly turned the screen face down. Daniel barely reacted outwardly, but he noticed the movement. "What are you working on?" Emily asked casually, pouring herself a glass of white wine. "Office complex in Tacoma." She nodded politely. The phone vibrated again. Emily picked it up and walked toward the hallway. "I'm just going to answer this." Her tone was light, but the call lasted nearly 15 minutes. Daniel stared at the blueprint lines on the table, though he wasn't really seeing them. When Emily returned, she looked perfectly relaxed. "Sorry," she said. "Brand partnership stuff." Daniel nodded, but he felt something strange settle into his chest, a quiet unease. Later that night, Daniel lay awake while Emily slept beside him. The soft glow of Seattle's skyline filtered through the bedroom window. He watched the steady rise and fall of her breathing. For years, that rhythm had meant comfort. Now it felt unfamiliar, as if he were lying beside someone he no longer fully knew. The following week, Emily's schedule suddenly became busier. "Yoga class," she said one afternoon, grabbing her gym bag. "On a Wednesday?" Emily smiled. They added new sessions. Daniel nodded. He had no reason not to believe her, except for the strange feeling that had begun growing inside him. 2 hours later, she returned home, glowing, energized. But Daniel noticed something unusual. Her yoga mat was still perfectly rolled, unused. He told himself he was imagining things. Marriage required trust. Without it, everything fell apart. Emily's social media continued to flourish. Every day brought another carefully curated moment of happiness. Sunlight spilling over breakfast bowls, morning jogs along Lake Washington, smiling selfies with captions about gratitude and balance. Thousands of followers responded instantly. Comments poured in. "You have the perfect life. Couple goals. Your husband must be so lucky." Daniel read those comments late one night while sitting alone in his office. His laptop illuminated the quiet room. For the first time, he looked at Emily's posts not as a proud husband, but as an outsider. Something about them felt staged, like a movie set designed to resemble real life. Even the captions sounded rehearsed. The thought unsettled him, because Daniel knew something about facades. Buildings could look flawless on the outside while their foundations slowly crumbled. One Friday evening, Daniel came home earlier than expected. A client meeting had been cancelled, leaving him with an unexpected free afternoon. The house was quiet. Emily's car sat in the driveway, but she wasn't in the kitchen. "Em?" Daniel called. No answer. He walked upstairs. The bedroom door was slightly open. Inside, Emily stood by the dresser, quickly slipping her phone into her purse. She looked startled when she saw him. "Oh, hey," she said. "I didn't hear you come in." Daniel smiled lightly. Meeting got cancelled. Emily nodded too quickly. "Lucky you." Her purse remained clutched tightly in her hand. Daniel noticed the tension in her shoulders. "Going somewhere?" he asked. "Just coffee with a friend." "Which friend?" Emily hesitated. "Claire." Claire was one of Emily's longtime friends, but something about the answer felt rehearsed. Daniel nodded anyway. "Tell her I said hi." Emily forced a smile and left the room. From the window, Daniel watched her car pull away. Only after the car disappeared did he realize something strange. Claire had moved to Chicago 3 months ago. That night during dinner, Lily chatted happily about school. "We made volcanoes today," she said excitedly. "That sounds messy," Daniel said with a smile. "It was." Emily laughed softly. But Daniel noticed she barely touched her food. Her phone rested beside her plate, screen down. Every few minutes, it lit up with a silent notification. Emily ignored them, too deliberately. Daniel tried to focus on Lily's story, but the tension around the table felt heavier than usual. When dinner ended, Emily quickly stood. "I have a brand meeting online tonight." Daniel looked up. "Another one?" "It's important." She kissed Lily's forehead and walked upstairs. The bedroom door closed. A moment later, Daniel heard her voice speaking quietly. Not the tone she used during professional calls. Softer, more intimate. He couldn't hear the words, only the rhythm, the pauses, the quiet laughter. Lily tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy?" Daniel blinked. "Yeah? Are you okay?" Daniel forced a smile. "Of course." But as he sat there in the quiet dining room, he realized something unsettling. The cracks in his perfect life were no longer imaginary. They were real. And they were growing wider every day. Later that night, after Emily fell asleep, Daniel walked quietly into the living room. The house was silent. Rain tapped gently against the windows. He opened his laptop again and typed a name into the search bar. Marcus Blake. The results appeared instantly. Articles, interviews, photos. Marcus was younger than Daniel expected. charismatic, confident, the kind of man magazines described as a visionary entrepreneur. Daniel scrolled through one article until a particular photo appeared, a promotional event. Emily stood beside Marcus, both smiling for the camera. Daniel stared at the image for a long time. Something about the way Marcus leaned slightly toward Emily. Something about the way Emily's eyes looked at him. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Daniel felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. Architects understood structural stress, and Daniel Harper could now see the truth clearly. His marriage wasn't collapsing all at once. It was failing slowly, quietly, one small crack at a time. The rain lingered over Seattle for most of the week. Grey clouds hung low above the skyline, turning the city into a quiet landscape of mist and reflections. Daniel Harper had lived here long enough to know that the weather often matched the mood of the people beneath it. Lately, the grey sky seemed to mirror his thoughts. He had not mentioned Marcus Blake to Emily since that evening in the kitchen. On the surface, life continued as it always had. Breakfast with Lily before school, morning traffic across the bridge, long hours at Norfolk Design reviewing structural plans and client proposals. Normal life. But Daniel now moved through that life with a new awareness, like someone walking through a house that might collapse. And Marcus Blake was the beam Daniel could not stop examining. 2 days later, Daniel found himself staring at Marcus again, this time on the large screen in the conference room at work. One of the junior architects had opened the business news segment while preparing for a presentation. "Isn't that the guy behind Novasphere?" someone said. Marcus Blake appeared on the screen, sitting comfortably in a modern studio chair, his posture relaxed but confident. The host smiled at him. "So tell us, Marcus, your wellness platform has exploded in popularity over the last year. What's the secret?" Marcus laughed lightly. "Honestly, simplicity. People are overwhelmed. My goal was to create something that helps them slow down." Daniel watched quietly from the end of the table. Marcus spoke smoothly, the way certain people did when they were used to being admired. Every word seemed carefully chosen without sounding rehearsed. Dark hair, calm eyes, easy smile. He had the kind of presence that made people listen. Daniel felt a strange tightness in his chest. "Didn't your wife promote that app recently?" one of Daniel's coworkers asked. Daniel forced a casual nod. "Yeah, she did some branding work for them." "Smart partnership," the coworker said. "That guy's company is worth hundreds of millions now." Daniel didn't respond. His attention stayed on the screen. Marcus was talking about authenticity, about building trust with audiences, about the importance of human connection. The irony made Daniel's jaw tighten slightly. That evening, Daniel arrived home earlier than usual. Emily was sitting on the living room couch with her laptop open, editing photos. The warm glow of sunset filtered through the windows, lighting the room with soft gold. She looked up and smiled. "You're early again." Daniel loosened his jacket. "Slow week." Emily turned the laptop slightly toward him. "Look at this." On the screen was a photo of her standing beside Marcus Blake at what appeared to be a promotional event. Both of them looked effortlessly polished. The lighting perfect, the smiles easy. "That was from the Novasphere launch party," Emily said. "Their marketing team wants me to post it tomorrow." Daniel studied the image. Marcus's arm rested casually behind Emily, not touching her, but close enough to feel familiar. "Looks professional," Daniel said. Emily seemed relieved by the neutral response. "Marcus has been great to work with," she added. Daniel sat down in the armchair across from her. "Yeah?" "Yeah, he's incredibly driven, and he actually listens to people." There was admiration in her voice. Not dramatic, not obvious, but Daniel heard it. "How often do you work with him?" he asked. Emily shrugged. "Here and there, mostly meetings and events." Daniel nodded slowly. "And those meetings happen here sometimes?" Emily hesitated. "Only briefly. Sometimes," she said. "It's easier than meeting downtown." Daniel leaned back in the chair. From the outside, the conversation sounded perfectly ordinary, but inside he felt the tension tightening again. "Lily mentioned seeing him last week," Daniel said casually. Emily froze, for just a fraction of a second. Then she laughed softly. "Oh my God, that must have confused her." "Why?" "He stopped by to drop off some campaign documents." Her explanation came quickly. Too quickly. She probably thought it was something more dramatic. Daniel studied Emily's face. Her smile remained steady, but something in her eyes felt guarded now. He realized something important in that moment. Emily wasn't necessarily lying, but she was controlling the truth. Carefully. Like someone adjusting the lighting in a photograph. Later that night, after Lily went to bed, Emily poured herself a glass of wine. Danielle joined her on the balcony. Seattle's skyline shimmered across the dark water of Lake Washington. They stood side by side in silence for a moment. "You've been quiet lately," Emily said gently. "Just work." Emily sipped her wine. "You know you can talk to me, right?" Danielle turned toward her. The words felt strangely ironic. Of course. She studied his face. For a brief moment, Danielle wondered if she sensed a suspicion growing inside him. But Emily only smiled. "You worry too much," she said. Then she leaned over and kissed his cheek. The gesture felt familiar, routine, but Danielle couldn't shake the strange distance he felt between them, like two actors performing a scene they had rehearsed too many times. 3 nights later, Danielle was working late in his home office when he heard Emily laughing softly in the hallway. Her voice drifted through the slightly open door. He hadn't realized she was on the phone. "No, that would be a disaster," she said, laughing again. Danielle froze. He had never heard her use that tone during business calls. It was lighter, warmer, more personal. He couldn't hear the other voice on the line, but he didn't need to. A few seconds later, Emily spoke again. "Okay, tomorrow then." A pause. "Good night, Marcus." Danielle felt something inside him drop. Not a loud crash, just the quiet realization that his fears were slowly becoming real. Emily ended the call and walked toward the bedroom. She hadn't noticed Danielle listening. He remained in the office chair for a long time, staring at the architectural model sitting on his desk. A miniature building he had been designing for months. Strong lines, carefully balanced structure, everything calculated to withstand pressure. But Danielle understood something now that he had been avoiding. Even the strongest structures failed when the stress became invisible. And somewhere inside his marriage, the pressure was building. Quietly. Relentlessly. And the man behind the charming smile on the screen, Marcus Blake, was standing closer to the center of it than Danielle had ever imagined. The first thing Danielle Harper noticed was how carefully Emily guarded her phone. Not in a dramatic way, there were no frantic gestures or obvious secrecy. Instead, it was subtle. A quiet shift of the screen when he walked into the room, a quick swipe to lock it, a habit of placing it face down on every surface. Small things, the kind most people would never question. But Danielle had begun watching the details, and once he started looking, he could not stop. A week passed after the phone call Danielle overheard. Life continued with the same routine. Breakfast at 7, school drop-offs, Emily's carefully scheduled meetings, Danielle's long hours at North Ark. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythm, something had changed. Danielle was no longer living inside his marriage. He was studying it, observing it the way a detective might observe a suspect. Quietly, patiently. One afternoon, Danielle left work early under the pretense of meeting a client downtown. Instead, he parked his car near a small cafe in Bellevue. He knew Emily often worked there. At least, that was what she had told him. From inside his car, he watched the sidewalk through the windshield. People passed by carrying laptops, coffee cups, grocery bags. Normal life. After 20 minutes, Emily appeared. She stepped out of the cafe, sunglasses perched lightly on her head. But she wasn't alone. Marcus Blake walked beside her. Danielle felt the now familiar tightening in his chest. Marcus looked exactly the way he did on television, confident, relaxed, slightly amused by the world around him. They weren't touching, not in any obvious way, but their bodies moved with the easy familiarity of people who spend time together. Marcus said something. Emily laughed. The sound carried faintly through the open window of Danielle's car. Danielle watched as they walked down the street together. Then Marcus placed his hand lightly on the small of Emily's back as they crossed the road. A small gesture, brief, but intimate. Danielle's stomach dropped. He forced himself to keep watching. They stopped in front of a sleek black car. Marcus opened the passenger door for her. Emily slid inside without hesitation. A moment later, the car disappeared into traffic. Danielle sat motionless for several seconds. The world outside his windshield continued normally. Cars moved, people crossed the street. But inside Danielle's mind, something was rearranging itself. The truth was beginning to take shape. That evening, Emily returned home around 6. Her hair was slightly windblown, her expression calm. "Hey," she said, walking into the kitchen. Danielle stood by the counter pretending to scroll through emails on his phone. "How was your day?" "Busy," she said lightly. Meetings all afternoon. Daniel looked up. Downtown? Emily nodded. Yeah. The lie came easily, smooth, almost effortless. Daniel felt something inside him grow colder. Good meetings? He asked. Very. She opened the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of sparkling water. From the outside, it was an ordinary conversation. But Daniel realized something disturbing. Emily was becoming very good at lying. That night, after Emily fell asleep, Daniel sat alone in the living room again. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Rain tapped against the windows. He opened Emily's Instagram page. Another new post. This one showed her sitting in a quiet cafe corner, sunlight illuminating her face. The caption read, "Sometimes you just need a peaceful place to think." Daniel stared at the image. He recognized the cafe immediately. The same one where he had watched her leave with Marcus earlier that day. Except in the photo, she was alone. The post had been uploaded only an hour ago. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair. The lie was subtle, but it was deliberate, and it was public. Thousands of people would see that image and believe it represented a quiet, solitary moment. But Daniel now knew the truth. Someone had been sitting across from her. Meanwhile, upstairs in the bedroom, Emily lay awake. Marcus's message glowed softly on her phone screen. Marcus. Did he suspect anything? Emily stared at the words for a long time. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Finally she typed, "No." A moment later, another message appeared. "Dinner tomorrow?" Emily hesitated. Across the room, Daniel's side of the bed was empty. He was still downstairs, working, or at least pretending to. The familiar guilt rose again in her chest. It had started months ago, quietly. At first, Marcus had just been a business contact. Confident, attentive, interested in her ideas. In ways Danielle had not been for years. Somewhere along the way, the professional conversations had shifted. Longer messages, private meetings, the first accidental touch, then the second, and eventually something neither of them bothered pretending was accidental anymore. Now Emily lived in two separate worlds. One was the stable, predictable life she had built with Danielle. The house, the family, the carefully curated happiness. The other was unpredictable, dangerous, exciting, Marcus's world. And the distance between those two worlds was shrinking. Emily typed her reply. "Tomorrow night works." She placed the phone on the nightstand and closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come easily. Because deep down, Emily knew something she hadn't fully admitted yet. Secrets had weight, and the longer they existed, the heavier they became. Downstairs, Daniel sat alone in the dim living room. His laptop screen illuminated a new page he had opened. A simple document. At the top he typed 3 words. Marcus Blake. Below that, he began listing dates, times, places, the small pieces of truth he had already seen. The list grew longer than he expected. Daniel stared at the growing pattern. Every lie, every unexplained absence, every quiet moment when Emily had seen somewhere else. For the first time since Lily asked her innocent question, Daniel felt something strange. Not confusion, not denial. Clarity. Because the cracks in his marriage were no longer small. They were spreading across the entire foundation. And Daniel Harper had finally begun to understand the structure of the truth. By mid-October, Seattle evenings arrived earlier. Darkness settled over the city before 6, and the air carried the crisp scent of wet leaves and distant rain. From the outside, the Harper home still looked warm and peaceful, light glowing from the kitchen windows, the quiet hum of a suburban neighborhood settling into night. Inside, Daniel Harper felt as though he were living inside a carefully constructed illusion. The evidence had been accumulating for weeks. Messages overheard, meetings that did not exist, photographs that told half-truths. Each piece alone might have meant nothing, but together they formed a pattern Daniel could no longer ignore. Still, there was a part of him that resisted the final step, because suspicion, however painful, still allowed for doubt. Truth would not, and truth, Daniel knew, would destroy everything. The evening began like many others. Emily stood in the bedroom mirror adjusting a pair of earrings, while Daniel sat on the edge of the bed scrolling through emails on his phone. "You're heading out tonight?" he asked casually. Emily glanced at him through the mirror. "Just dinner with a brand partner." Her voice was calm, practiced. Downtown? Yeah. She picked up her purse and sprayed a faint touch of perfume on her wrist. Daniel watched her quietly. Marcus? He asked. Emily's hand paused in the air, just briefly. Then she nodded. He's bringing a few people from the marketing team. Daniel forced a small smile. Sounds productive. Emily smiled back, relieved. You should come next time, she said lightly. Daniel said nothing, because both of them knew that invitation would never happen. Emily left the house at 7. 10 minutes later, Daniel grabbed his coat and keys. The decision had been building inside him for days. Tonight, he simply stopped resisting it. Seattle streets glistened with rain as Daniel followed Emily's car from a distance. Traffic was light. The city lights reflected across the wet pavement like fractured stars. Emily drove toward downtown, exactly as she had said. For a moment, Daniel wondered if he had been wrong all along. But instead of turning toward the busy restaurant district, Emily's car veered into a quieter neighborhood near the waterfront. Daniel slowed, keeping several cars between them. Emily pulled into the parking lot of a small boutique hotel. Not the kind used for business dinners, the kind used for privacy. Daniel's pulse began to pound in his ears. He parked across the street and watched. A sleek black car was already waiting near the entrance. Marcus Blake stepped out as Emily approached. Even from a distance, Marcus's confidence was unmistakable. He moved toward her with an easy familiarity. Emily smiled. The kind of smile Daniel had not seen directed at him in a long time. They spoke briefly. Marcus reached out and touched her arm. The gesture lingered. Not professional, not accidental. Emily didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped closer. Daniel felt the final pieces of doubt crumble inside him. But the moment that followed still struck like a physical blow. Marcus leaned down and kissed her. Slowly, comfortably, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Emily kissed him back. There was no hesitation, no guilt, only the quiet certainty of two people who had already crossed the line long ago. Daniel's vision blurred for a second, not with tears, with something colder, a kind of emotional shock. He had imagined this moment countless times in the past few weeks, yet the reality felt strangely quiet. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting, just the silent collapse of something he had spent years building. Marcus rested his hand against Emily's waist as they walked toward the hotel entrance. She leaned slightly into him. Their silhouettes disappeared through the glass doors. And just like that, Daniel Harper's marriage ended. Daniel remained in the car for a long time. The rain intensified, tapping steadily against the windshield. People passed by on the sidewalk, umbrellas raised, unaware that a man sitting in a parked car had just watched his entire life change. He thought about Lily, her small voice from the backseat days earlier. Dad, who was the man with Mom? Children notice things adults often ignored. Daniel now understood that Lily had seen the truth long before he had been willing to. Eventually, Daniel started the engine. He drove slowly through the city streets without a clear destination. Past the glowing windows of restaurants, past couples walking together under shared umbrellas, past the quiet rhythm of a city continuing its normal life. Inside the car, Daniel felt a strange calm settling over him. Not peace, but clarity. The uncertainty was gone. The doubt was gone. The truth had finally surfaced, and it was exactly as devastating as he had feared. Nearly 2 hours later, Daniel returned home. The house was silent. Lily's bedroom door was slightly open, a soft nightlight glowing inside. Daniel stepped quietly into the room. She slept curled around her stuffed rabbit, her small face peaceful. For a moment, Daniel simply stood there watching her. Then he sat gently on the edge of the bed. Everything in his life had just changed. But Lily was still here, still innocent, still trusting him to keep her world safe. Daniel brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. I've got you, he whispered softly. Lily shifted slightly in her sleep but did not wake. Daniel remained there a moment longer before standing. Down the hallway, the master bedroom felt strangely unfamiliar. Emily would not be home for hours. Daniel knew that without needing to check. He walked into his home office instead. The document he had been building on his laptop still glowed faintly on the screen. Dates, times, patterns, evidence. Daniel stared at it for a long moment. Then he slowly closed the laptop. Because the investigation was over. The truth had already revealed itself. Now only one thing remained. The confrontation. And Daniel Harper knew it was coming very soon. Emily returned home a little after midnight. The house was quiet, wrapped in the stillness that always came after rain. The wet streets outside reflected the pale glow of the neighborhood streetlights, and the silence inside the Harper home felt almost fragile. She slipped off her heels near the door and placed her purse on the kitchen counter. For a moment she stood there, listening. The house felt different, not in any obvious way, just heavier. Emily assumed Daniel had gone to bed early. He had been quiet all week, absorbed in work as usual. That thought stirred a familiar feeling in her chest, a mix of guilt and resentment. She moved slowly through the living room toward the staircase. "Emily!" The voice came from the darkness. Emily froze. Daniel sat in the armchair near the window, his face partially illuminated by the soft light of a table lamp. He had been waiting. "How long have you been sitting there?" she asked cautiously. "Long enough." His voice was calm, too calm. Emily felt a slight tightening in her stomach. "I didn't know you were awake." Daniel stood slowly. "You had dinner with Marcus tonight?" Emily hesitated. "Yes." "Just the two of you?" Another pause. "Yes." Daniel nodded once, almost thoughtfully. Then he asked a question that finally broke the illusion. "Did you enjoy the hotel?" Emily's breath caught. For a moment she said nothing. Her mind raced through possibilities, excuses, explanations, denials. But Daniel's eyes told her something unmistakable. He already knew. "You followed me," she said quietly. Daniel's expression didn't change. "I watched you kiss him." The words landed heavily in the room. Emily closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them again, the careful composure she usually carried had begun to crack. "How long?" Daniel asked. His voice remained controlled, but something beneath it trembled with restrained anger. Emily looked down at the floor. "A few months." Daniel gave a short, humorless laugh. "A few months." The disbelief in his voice echoed through the room. "You expect me to believe that?" Emily didn't respond. Daniel stepped closer. "I've seen the messages, Emily. The meetings, the lies." His voice rose for the first time. "You think this started a few months ago?" Emily's silence answered the question. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing across the living room. "Jesus Christ." The anger finally surfaced, raw and sharp. "All those nights you said you were working, all those posts online about your perfect life, were those lies too?" Emily's voice came out quietly. "You were never there, Daniel." He stopped walking. "What?" "You were never there," she repeated, louder this time. Daniel stared at her. "I was working," he said, "for us." Emily shook her head slowly. "For your career." The words struck harder than Daniel expected. "I was building a life for this family." "You were building buildings," Emily said, "and leaving me alone inside them." The accusation hung heavily between them. Daniel felt the anger twisting inside him again. "So that's your justification?" he said bitterly. "You felt lonely, so you slept with another man?" Emily's eyes filled with frustrated tears. "It wasn't like that." "Then explain it to me," Daniel snapped, "because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that." Emily struggled to steady her breathing. "You remember 3 years ago?" she asked quietly. Daniel frowned. "What about it?" "That was when everything changed." Daniel didn't answer immediately. 3 years ago had been the year his career accelerated dramatically. Major projects, longer hours, frequent travel. "I remember working hard," he said. Emily nodded. "You stopped seeing me." "That's not true." "It is." Her voice shook now. "You came home exhausted every night. You answered emails at dinner. You took phone calls during Lily's school events." Daniel looked away. "Marcus listened to me," Emily continued. The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. "He asked about my ideas, my work, my life." Daniel laughed bitterly. "So the solution was an affair?" Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. "It didn't start that way." Daniel looked at her sharply. "How did it start?" Emily hesitated. "Coffee meetings, campaign planning, long conversations. And then," she swallowed. "Then one night he kissed me." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And you kissed him back?" Emily said nothing. The silence was answer enough. For several seconds neither of them spoke. The quiet house suddenly felt unbearably tense. Finally Daniel spoke again. "Did you ever plan to tell me?" Emily shook her head slowly. "I didn't know how." "So you were just going to keep lying forever?" "I thought I could end it." Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "You ended it by checking into a hotel tonight?" Emily flinched. "I know how it looks." Daniel's voice dropped dangerously low. "It looks exactly like what it is." Another long silence followed. Upstairs, Lily shifted slightly in her sleep. The faint sound reminded both of them of the fragile life they had built together. Emily wiped her eyes. I never meant for this to happen. Daniel shook his head. That's the worst part. What? You meant it enough to keep doing it? The words cut through the room. Emily had no answer for them. Daniel felt the anger draining away, replaced by something deeper, a heavy, aching sadness. All this time, he said quietly, I thought we were building something together. Emily looked at him helplessly. We were. Daniel shook his head slowly. No. His voice was calm again, but this time the calm felt final. We weren't. Emily suddenly felt a cold fear creeping into her chest. Daniel. But he was already walking past her toward the stairs. Where are you going? She asked. To sleep, he said without turning around. In the guest room. Emily stood alone in the living room as he disappeared upstairs. For the first time since the affair began, the reality of what she had done settled heavily on her shoulders. The secret was no longer hidden, and the consequences had finally begun. Morning arrived quietly over Bellevue. Soft grey light slipped through the curtains, illuminating the Harper house with the calm indifference of another ordinary day. Outside, the neighborhood stirred slowly, garage doors opening, cars backing into driveways, children walking to school. Inside the house, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Daniel had barely slept. The guest room bed still smelled faintly of unused sheets and unfamiliar space. For most of the night, he had stared at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation over and over in his mind. Emily's words echoed louder than he expected. You were never there. The accusation angered him, but it also unsettled him, because somewhere deep down, Daniel knew there was a painful sliver of truth hidden inside it. Still, truth didn't erase betrayal, and betrayal was what now filled every quiet space of the house. When Daniel stepped into the kitchen that morning, Emily was already there. She stood by the coffee machine, her posture stiff, her eyes tired. Neither of them spoke immediately. The air between them felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter with the smallest movement. Morning, Emily said softly. Daniel nodded but did not return the greeting. He poured himself coffee without looking at her. The silence stretched. Then footsteps echoed down the hallway. Daddy! Lily rushed into the kitchen with the boundless energy only 7-year-olds possessed. Daniel's expression softened instantly. Hey, kiddo. She hugged him tightly around the waist. Emily watched the moment quietly. Something in her chest twisted with guilt. Because Lily had always been the best part of their marriage. The part that had never felt broken. Can you take me to school today? Lily asked. Of course. Mom promised yesterday, but she had a meeting. Emily lowered her eyes slightly. Daniel felt the tension tighten again. Daddy always has time, Lily continued cheerfully. Emily forced a small smile. Mom has time too, she said gently. Lily looked between them. Children noticed tone long before they understood meaning. Are you guys mad at each other? She asked. Daniel and Emily froze. The innocence of the question felt painfully direct. No, Daniel said quickly. We just had a disagreement. Lily seemed to accept that answer, but the brief shadow in her expression lingered. The drive to school was unusually quiet. Rain misted lightly across the windshield as Daniel navigated through the morning traffic. Lily sat in the back seat, hugging her backpack. Daddy? Yeah? You and Mom were talking loud last night. Daniel glanced at her in the mirror. You heard that? A little. He exhaled slowly. Sometimes adults argue. Are you getting divorced? The question struck him harder than anything else had. Why would you think that? Daniel asked carefully. Lily shrugged. Emma's parents did. Emma was Lily's best friend from school. They yelled a lot before it happened. Daniel felt a tight knot form in his chest. He pulled the car to a stop outside the school building. Then he turned around in his seat to face her fully. Listen to me, he said gently. Whatever happens between Mom and Dad, we both love you more than anything in the world. Lily studied his face. Promise? Promise. She seemed satisfied with that, but as she stepped out of the car, Daniel realized something painful. Children might not understand adult problems, but they felt the emotional shockwaves anyway. Back at home, Emily sat alone at the kitchen table. Her phone lay in front of her. Marcus's name glowed on the screen. Marcus, did everything go okay last night? Emily stared at the message. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. For the first time since their relationship began, the excitement she usually felt when seeing his name was gone. In its place was something heavier, reality. She typed slowly. Daniel knows. The reply came almost immediately. What happened? Emily hesitated. Then she wrote, He followed me. Several seconds passed, then Marcus responded. We knew that risk existed. The cold practicality of the message made Emily's stomach sink. She stared at the words. Somehow she had expected something different. Concern, fear, emotion. Instead, Marcus sounded detached. Another message appeared. What are you going to do? Emily didn't know, and for the first time she realized Marcus might not know either. Daniel returned home shortly before noon. Work felt impossible today. Every blueprint looked meaningless. Every conversation with colleagues sounded distant. Emily looked up when he entered the house. Can we talk? She asked quietly. Daniel leaned against the kitchen counter. What's left to say? Emily took a deep breath. I ended things with Marcus. Daniel's expression remained unreadable. Today? Yes. Daniel studied her face. Because you wanted to? Emily hesitated. Because I had to. Daniel gave a tired smile. That's not the same thing. Emily looked down. I'm trying to fix this. Daniel let out a slow breath. The anger he had felt the night before had faded slightly. In its place was something more complicated. Grief, confusion, and the overwhelming weight of a decision he did not yet know how to make. Do you love him? Daniel asked quietly. Emily looked up sharply. The pause lasted too long. Daniel nodded slowly. That's what I thought. Tears filled Emily's eyes. I never stopped loving you. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. That makes this worse, he said softly, because love was supposed to protect people from this kind of destruction. Yet somehow it hadn't. The silence stretched between them again. Two people standing inside the ruins of a life they once believed unbreakable. Finally, Daniel spoke. I need time. Emily nodded. I understand. But both of them knew something fundamental had already changed. Trust, once broken, rarely returned in the same form. And somewhere between anger and heartbreak, Daniel Harper now faced the hardest question of all. Not whether Emily had betrayed him. That truth was undeniable. The real question was whether forgiveness was still possible. Winter came early to Seattle that year. By late November, the sky seemed permanently gray, and a thin chill settled into the air that never fully disappeared. The trees along Lake Washington had shed most of their leaves, leaving quiet silhouettes against the pale horizon. Inside the Harper house, the silence had changed. It was no longer explosive or tense. Instead, it carried the quiet finality of something that had already ended. For 3 weeks after the confrontation, Daniel and Emily lived like careful strangers sharing the same space. They spoke politely. They coordinated Lily's school schedule. They avoided every conversation that truly mattered. The house remained clean. Dinner still appeared on the table most evenings. From the outside, their life still looked intact. But the warmth that had once filled the rooms was gone, and both of them felt it. One Sunday morning, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a folder of papers. The early light filtered softly through the windows. Emily walked in wearing a loose sweater, her hair pulled back into a tired knot. She noticed the papers immediately. Her chest tightened. Is that what I think it is? She asked quietly. Daniel nodded. Divorce documents. The word hung silently between them. Emily pulled out a chair and sat across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she asked the question she had been avoiding for weeks. Are you sure? Daniel looked at her. Not with anger, not even with resentment, just a quiet, steady sadness. I am. Emily felt tears gather in her eyes. I ended things with Marcus. I know, I told you that. Daniel nodded again. But it doesn't change what happened. Emily stared at the table. I want to fix this. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair. I believe you. Emily looked up, surprised. You do? Yes. The honesty in his voice made her chest ache. Then why? Because fixing it doesn't mean it becomes the same. Emily fell silent. Daniel continued gently. I've spent weeks thinking about this. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I kept asking myself whether I could forgive you. Emily's heart pounded. And, she whispered. Daniel looked toward the living room, where Lily's toys were scattered across the rug. I might be able to. Emily's breath caught. But forgiveness isn't the same as trust, he said quietly. The word settled heavily into the room. And trust, Daniel continued, is what a marriage is built on. Emily wiped a tear from her cheek. I broke it. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to. They both knew it was true. Later that afternoon, Daniel took Lily to the park near the lake. The winter wind moved softly through the empty playground. Most families had already retreated indoors for the season. Lily climbed onto the swing set while Daniel pushed her gently. "Higher," she laughed. Daniel smiled faintly. For a moment, everything felt simple again. "Daddy?" "Yeah?" "Mom has been sad lately." Daniel nodded. "I know. Did you guys fix the argument?" Daniel slowed the swing slightly. Children deserved honesty, but they also deserve protection. "We're working on something," he said carefully. Lily turned her head to look at him. "Are we still a family?" Daniel felt his throat tighten. He stopped the swing and knelt beside her. "We will always be a family, but things might look a little different." Lily frowned slightly. "Different how?" "You might live in 2 homes instead of 1. She thought about that. Then she asked the question only a child would ask. "Will you still make pancakes on Saturdays?" Daniel smiled. "Of course." "And Mom will still come to my school plays?" "Yes." Lily seemed satisfied with those answers. She wrapped her arms around his neck. "Okay." Daniel held her tightly for a moment, because in the end, Lily was the reason he had chosen this path. Not anger, not revenge, just the quiet understanding that some broken things could not be rebuilt the same way. A month later, Daniel moved into a small townhouse closer to downtown Seattle. It wasn't as large as the house in Bellevue, but it felt peaceful, clean, honest. Lily spent half her time there, filling the rooms with the kind of joyful chaos only children could create. Daniel returned to work with a new focus. His colleagues noticed the change. He spoke less during meetings, but when he did, his words carried more clarity. Pain had a way of sharpening perspective. Emily remained in the Bellevue house for the time being. Marcus Blake had disappeared from her life almost as quickly as he had entered it. Their relationship, once fueled by secrecy and excitement, had not survived the weight of reality. Without the thrill of hiding, it simply faded. Now Emily spent long evenings alone in the quiet house. Sometimes she scrolled through her old social media posts. Pictures of perfect mornings, perfect dinners, perfect smiles. Thousands of people had believed those images represented happiness. But Emily now understood something painful. The most convincing lies were often the ones we told ourselves. One rainy evening, several months later, Daniel stood on the balcony of his townhouse, overlooking the Seattle skyline. The city lights shimmered across the dark water. Lily slept peacefully inside after a long day at school. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt something unfamiliar. Peace. Not the loud, triumphant kind, just a quiet steadiness. His phone buzzed softly in his pocket. A message from Emily. "Lily told me you made pancakes again today." Daniel smiled slightly. He typed back. "Tradition is important." A few seconds later, another message appeared. "Thank you for still being a good father." Daniel stared at the words for a moment. Then he replied, "Thank you for being a good mother." Their relationship had changed forever, but somehow something gentler had grown in its place. Not the passionate love they once shared, but something quieter, a mutual understanding born from mistakes. Daniel slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked out over the city lights again. The past could not be undone. But life, like architecture, allowed for rebuilding. Sometimes the strongest structures were the ones rebuilt after collapse. And for the first time since that simple question from the backseat of his car, Daniel Harper finally felt ready to begin again.